Hello and welcome everyone. Today we have Dr. Morgan with us. She is our student and very happy to note that she pre-matched in pediatrics. So we have her here today to share her experiences with her. So welcome, Dr. Morgan. Glad to have you here.
Hello, Dr. Kera. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to meet you all and share my experiences with you.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's get started with the beginning of your USMLE journey. You took a unique kind of a route, taking CK first and then step one. So walk us through that experience and what would you do differently?
Sure. So I'm a medical graduate from India. I graduated in the year 2017 and I moved to the US. And a few months later, I started my USMLE journey. So I applied only in pediatrics, and this was my first math cycle in the 2021 math season. And thankfully, I accepted a pre-match offer in pediatrics. So my experience is kind of unique because I'm one of those few candidates who take USMLE Step 2 CK even before taking the Step 1. So when I finished my medical school, I got some advice from my seniors that it's okay to take CK first because you will be strong clinically, because we are just exposed to the clinical sciences in our medical school. And since you are a fresh graduate, the CK, you can take CK first and you'll do really well. But in the hindsight, I think it was a very big mistake.
Yeah,
I went through the forums, and when I read about the experiences in CK, they told me you can finish CK in 3 to 5 months.
I
But
see.
I didn't realize that 5 months was after taking step one, because I feel since I've done step one also now, I know step one is kind of the base that we need to prime ourselves for the clinical science CK exam. So I took my CK first, and I didn't do really well. I had a very low score, somewhere around the 8th to the 10th centile. So I was not very. It was not a very good score, and I'm honest, and I was very depressed with that.
Hmm.
I felt I could have done much better, but I was lacking in test taking strategies, my time management skills. It was the first time I was exposed to a 9-hour long exam. So all those were not what I expected. Then I took my USMLE Step 2 CS and I cleared it. So then the last hurdle was Step 1. But this
Mhm.
time I was very sure that I was going to take the exam only when I was really well prepared.
Okay.
So in CK, I studied all alone. I didn't have any study partners. I just used to do the UWorld question bank day in and day out. I really worked hard, but I didn't get the results I needed. So in step one, I kind of changed my approach. Before doing the question bank, that is UWorld, before doing the question bank, I started to have a base preparation. I watched videos like the Boards and Beyond, Sketchy for micro and pharmacology. All those helped me build the basics. And then I studied first aid, and then finally I touched my UWorld question bank. And because I had a very good base preparation, I think my UWorld overall statistics were very good when I started doing the questions. So I think it's okay to take CK if you're really very confident, but I will feel that step one has to be taken before step two CK. And even if you take CK and do very well, I think if you have done step one before CK, it will have a huge impact on your score. So when programs interviewed me, they were really amazed by my step one score, because I had a very good score around somewhere around the 80th to 85th centile in step one. And they were like, why did you go down in CK? But then I had to explain them, no, I took my CK first and then I did my step one. So anyone who has done CK, I think step one, the score really matters. But I think what really matters is to make that impressive huge jump. So
Mhm.
even if we have taken the step one before and you have a low score, I think when you're doing the CK, I think you should make a impressive jump, which is impressive enough to know that it was just one of from the score, and you are actually capable of improving.
Okay. So I got a couple of questions. Like you said, do step one first and not CK. But having done CK first, what were the advantages anyway you had having known at least the duration, 9 hour, 8 hour exam? Were there any advantages that you took into step one having taken CK first?
Absolutely. As I said, coming from India, we are not used to solving MCQs. We are not used to solving clinical vignettes, and that too for such a long hour exam. So I will definitely say I knew what to expect in step one. I knew what were the mistakes I did in CK. As I said, I started preparing with study partners. I started going through all my old NBME question papers with my study partners. So I was exposed to a lot of questions. In addition to UWorld, which I used primarily, I also solved some Amboss question bank questions. So I made sure that I will only take the exam when I started hitting 250s in my NBMEs and UWorld SA1. So my NBMEs and self-assessments were kind of low in CK, but I thought, okay, I'll do better in the main exam, and maybe I'll improve my score to 5 or 10 points. But I didn't take that risk in step one. So I knew that I only after I started hitting my target score in NBMEs, I'll take the main exam.
Okay.
So I knew kind of what to expect, and I knew where I had made mistakes in CK. So that's how I improved in step one.
Okay. And a couple of other questions that students always ask us for step one, for example, is did you do UWorld tutor mode offline, or how did you approach UWorld when you started step one?
Yes. So I see many people doing 2 passes, 3 passes of UWorld, but I personally did only 1 pass. But
Mhm.
that 1 pass, I made sure I nailed all the questions. So I didn't. So initially, I started doing the system-wise mode,
I see.
and it was non-timed because I knew I needed the time to approach all the questions, to form kind of plan how to approach all the questions. And I made sure I read the answers and explanations in depth. So I took it on my own pace, but as time started rolling in, I think I started doing it in random mode and time mode. So I think it's we cannot generalize the approach I took with
Mhm.
everyone, but I think quality matters more than
Obviously.
quantity. So rather than doing 2 times, I did only 1 pass, but that 1 pass I think I did for about 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
So it depends on the individual, but I think this approach helped me.
So after having taken CK, it took you about 5 to 6 months to prepare for step one if you were to isolate that time? Because I want to also understand how long does it take after CK to prepare for step one?
So as I said, step one is the base that will help you in CK, but I don't think the reverse works. So
Okay.
even if you have done CK, there are a lot of new concepts to be read for step one. For example, biochemistry, very core pharmacology, which we don't read for CK, most of the microbiology. So even though I've touched those concepts, I think it was a brand new journey for me. It was like I was starting from the scratch when I did step one. That's why I advise to not take CK first, because
Okay.
step one is kind of the base. So I read for step one almost around 9 months.
I
But for
see.
the first 3-4 months, I was only priming and reading the basics, and I was reading first aid. I was reading all the I was watching all the videos, and I was watching Boards in Beyond, Sketchy, and so on. So the first 3-4 months I took to kind of prime myself, and then I started my UWorld. So I almost read for about 9 to 10 months for step one.
And I think that is the average we have seen, recent graduates, step one, between 6 to 9 months is the ideal kind of time. Okay,
Yes.
good. Thank you. Last question before we switch to the other aspect. What's your view on Kaplan? How much time did you at all use Kaplan for step one? What's your
No, I did not use Kaplan, but I have a few friends who took the live course, Kaplan live course, and they said it helped. But I kind of personally didn't use Kaplan.
okay? Okay. All right. So thank you for your overview for the step one and CK, because I think students who are preparing really need to know this. Now let's jump into the post-exam strategy. So your interest in pediatrics and your approach to the match. So when did you get interested in pediatrics?
My interest was mainly during my experiences in the rotations during medical school.
Mm-hmm.
Being with children made me really very happy than being with others. So naturally, pediatrics was my career choice.
Okay. And as we all know, for USMLE and in this journey, you need to get those experiences, US
Mm.
experiences, as well as maybe home country experiences. So how did you go about getting those pediatric specific experiences, or even maybe non-pediatric experiences, both the clinical or research or volunteer?
Absolutely. So, mainly the challenge, especially in the COVID, was to get on site clinical experiences. So, I had a good 3-4 months before the COVID actually hit.
Mm-hmm.
So, as soon as I took my step one, which was the last exam I had to take, I started planning for my USCE. So I think the key was to even plan well ahead. So I planned about 6 to 7 months ahead, even before I had taken my step one. So I took my step one, and the very next month, I was somewhere in a university hospital doing my rotation. So that time, I think, is the very precious time. So I made sure that I had US clinical experiences in very geographic locations. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to restrict myself to just the East Coast or the South or somewhere. And I think that really helped that I
Mm-hmm.
have US clinical experience from very geographic locations, because that was one thing that showed to the interviewers that I'll be able to move to any location if I match there. So
Right.
I didn't have any specific restrictions in the geographical location. And I started also getting involved in various organizations in pediatrics. That really helps to kind of drill into the interviewers that we are really into pediatrics. So even in one of my interviews, they asked me about this particular organization, how were you involved. So then I used to tell them that I used to attend their conferences, I was involved in their webinars, I also attended their live virtual events. So I think this is what the programs actually want to see in their candidates, that they are actually very passionate about pediatrics and not just applying as a backup. And so I would say that having a pediatric specific CV was really very helpful. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any experience apart from pediatrics. All my US clinical experience were in pediatrics. Even my home country experience was also in pediatrics. So I made sure I had a very pediatric specific CV. The one rotation which I didn't do in pediatrics was my rotation in diagnostic radiology. There was an option to take internal medicine and some other family medicine rotations, but I didn't want to, dilute my CV going into those specialties. So I took a diagnostic radiology rotation, which was a telerotation as well. So I even though I took those rotation in my description in the CV, I made sure I mentioned everything I did related to pediatrics.
I see.
So I think even though even especially in this COVID, if a person is not able to get in-person interviews and they are opting for tele-rotation, and let's say they are not able to get many pediatric rotation because of the situation going on, I think it's okay to go to internal medicine or family medicine or any other specialty rotation.
I
But
see.
I think it's very very important to let the attending know that they are applying to pediatrics, because the attending are actually very friendly and they understand that, okay, I'm interested in pediatrics, so they'll teach us and they will modulate all the teaching related to pediatrics. And I think in the end they will give a very strong letter in pediatrics. So even if I'm going to an internal medicine rotation, I think in the end when the attending writes me a letter, he'll write a very strong letter related to pediatrics. So I think in that way we can modulate all our experiences, even though it's not in pediatrics, to a more specialty focused CV.
Okay.
And I'll certainly say that I had a few good clinical experiences from various university hospitals, and I think those university letterhead really helps because I was able to get diverse clinical experiences, let's say pediatric critical care or some subspecialty focused experiences. I think even though we have hands-on experience, we will not be able to get that diverse experience if we go into a primary care setting. Of course, those experiences are important as well, but I think getting university letterhead LORs really helps.
Okay. So let me just summarize what you just said so that our viewers can understand. One is have a focused approach. So if you're interested in pediatrics, make sure your CV is full of pediatrics so that it's not a backup. Second, even if you have to do some non-pediatrics or non-prime, the specialty rotation, make sure the attending knows that you are applying for pediatrics as a specialty so that they are LOR can be customized that way. And third, of course, the letterhead of the recommendation, the LOR matters a lot. Obviously, university programs are much highly valued. Okay, good.
Yes.
So, and now in addition to these things, as we wrap up, are there other things you think the programs look for? Is it research or is it something else that stands out or stood out for you in the interviews that they were looking for?
Actually, I had research experience, but I didn't have any research experience in the US.
Mhm.
All my research experience, publications, and oral presentations were from my medical school experience in India.
I see.
But they did touch on the research experience, but they were not related to pediatrics. But they were still very eager to know what was the research I did and what were the outcomes. But they didn't actually screw me into if I had any pediatric specific research or not, if I had any research in US or not. So if you have any research in US in pediatrics, it's well and good. But otherwise, having some kind of research experience always helps. And regarding volunteer experiences, I would say volunteer experience is just to give back to the community. So we
Right.
cannot actually get involved in pediatrics so much. But on my journey, I did find many experiences which were related to pediatrics. For example, you can volunteer in some pediatric clinics. There were also some mentor opportunities for mid and high school students, and if you can take up those opportunities, we can convey that we are eager to work with adolescents and young adults. So I think it can help, but they are not looking for very pediatric specific experiences in volunteer, I will say.
Okay. So now let's come to the other burning topic of the year, I guess, which is telerotations. A lot of students ask us these questions. Will they really help? I'm not able to get on-site USC, but I don't know what telerotation is. So you've done a couple of telerotations. So tell us, A, how are telerotations structured, and how can you maximize your learnings from telerotations for those of us who could not go on site? And three, what do programs focus on when they see telerotations? What kind of questions do they ask?
Absolutely. So I have done two telerotations. One was in pediatrics. The other, as I said, was in diagnostic radiology. My first telerotation in pediatrics was in Chicago. Was with a preceptor in Chicago.
Mhm.
So it mainly consisted of didactic lectures. We used to do presentations on certain topics, and there were simulation lab sessions in
Mhm.
which they used to simulate live cases, and we used to solve those cases. And we also got to discuss all the cases which was seen in the hospital. So we didn't actually have any live patient encounter, but regardless, it was a very useful and I will say a good clinical experience based on a learning point of view. But I've heard my friends doing some telerotations with other attendings and preceptors who made them see and interact patients. But I think those kind of rotations are very few.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly they get involved only in didactic lectures and simulation labs. So it depends on your personal goals. I know telerotation is no match to doing on-site rotations, but if that's all we can get in this pandemic, I know all the crisis going on. So if telerotation is all that you can get, then there's no harm doing it. As far as how the program directors see it, I think they are open to it. I did mention in my CV that this was a telerotation in the description of the rotations, but no one actually questioned me like, why did you do telerotation? Why didn't you do an on-site rotation? Of course, I had many live clinical experience, but I don't think they weighed telerotation as a bad thing. They
I
were
see.
actually kind of open to it. And even one program director in one of my interviews, he mentioned that it's good to have clinical touch. It's okay if it's tele. He was actually kind of hinting that it's okay to do telerotations as far as you are in clinical touch. So I think the programs are more open to it. Even some of the community programs and the curriculum they have switched it to tele, like live grand rounds and all that. So I think they are more open to it this year. And more than this year, I think next year they'll be even more receptive.
Right, because they would have gotten time to get used to it, both the
Yes.
students and the programs.
Yes.
Okay, so tele is otherwise not a bad thing if you're not getting on-site rotations, and of course you got to assess what kind of tele opportunities you have. Okay,
Yes.
so that's a good thing. Now let's move on and talk about your journey with Sarthi, with our team. So I know you joined earlier in the season.
Yes.
So I want to first, and you were quite prepared when you came in. At least you had your basics all researched in terms of the USMLE journey and all. So let's first talk about up to the application time. So the PS and the CV, and in general the classes. How was your experience with the Sarthi team?
I had a very, very good experience, I'll say. The main reason why I joined Sarthi initially was because I needed to have that confidence when I'm going into that math season that someone is having my back. And after coming to Sarthi, I knew there were this like-minded people like me. So we had a very good, rich community who was always very helpful. They didn't no one was like not ready to help. They were always answering questions, and the Telegram group was really very active. So I think it was that confidence that I think I liked, which I got from Sarthi. That was the first insight I had when I joined Sarthi. But as the pandemic hit and everything was going on a crisis and we didn't know what was going on, I think Sarthi evolved with us. Uh, we kind of started having classes on how to do well on virtual IVs. So we had classes on when the program cutoff dates were pushed back to October from September, we had classes as to what do we do in those extra 5 weeks we got. So not just the season approach, but I think Sarthi evolved with all the crisis and all the questions we had. So I think that was a very good confidence that I got.
Okay. Uh, so on the PS and CV, your IRAS CV personal statement, what was your kind of feedback expectation from our team, and how did it work out?
Yeah, so I started with my CV and personal statement quite early, even before we got the ERAS token. I think I made my first draft of personal statement somewhere around April. So I was working on it for quite a long time. But then we had personal statement and CV classes. So I think after watching those classes, I got many new dimensions with which I could work on. The initial drafts which I had were very plain and simple, but after I attended all the classes, I started to know what the program directors expect out of the CV. So just in a CV, it was very small things like if you're starting with the bullet point for one description, we have to stick with that for the whole CV. So all these kind of small points, after I started scrutinizing my CV after watching the classes, I think those made a very big difference. And again, using action verbs for describing what we do, and not just explaining our experiences but putting numbers to it so that it sounds more genuine. So all those kind of advice, I think I was able to incorporate all those in my profile just because I joined Sarthi. And the biggest help, I think, came from the journalist. Because no matter how well we write our CV, there is always mistakes that we cannot catch being a medico. So when a journalist they see it through their eyes, so they have a different perspective. And I even got some full stop commas, some capital letters, all those corrected. All those were small points, but all these adds up to give the final end result, which is very remarkable.
Okay. So finally, let's talk about the interview preparation, the classes that we held on interview prep and your mock interview. So what was your feedback and experience with those?
So honestly, the only IV preparation material I used were from Sarthi. So I watched the interview overview videos, and then I watched the practice classes which we recorded with our own students. The main advantage is that when we watched the practice classes, we had different classes, and I think for each module we had around 3-4 classes, and in each class we had around 10 to 12 students. So when we watch those classes, we are actually practicing with 20 to 30 different SPs. So it's like we are practicing with so many people. We are hearing so many answers, and we are getting feedback for each answer. So it's equivalent to that massive interview prep. And I made sure I watch all those classes religiously. I had a separate notebook in which I wrote down all the questions, and I framed the answers according to the classes and feedback. So I think it was really very helpful. There are some books out there which some of my friends use. So there are interview prep books. People will say that yes, all the questions can be answered by seeing videos in YouTube. I think yes, it can be done, but what is the time? So the time it will take to figure everything out is kind of massive. It cannot be done without getting a professional help. So at this point of the journey, after putting in so many efforts, so many years, writing USMLE, doing all the USCE, I think this should not be compromised, because interview is as much important as getting a good score in USMLE. So I think interview prep is a must, and I think Sarthi really helped me with that.
Okay, thank you. Finally, let's switch back to other applicants who may be interested in pediatrics. So whether they are recent graduates or slightly older graduates, what would be some tips you will have for them as they start probably preparing for the next season? What should they do if they are interested in pediatrics?
Absolutely. So pediatrics, I'll say please don't use it as your backup, because when we do that, I think the program directors can see through you. Even if you manage to kind of manipulate in the CV, I think when they interview us, they'll be able to find out if we are using it as a backup or it's a primary specialty. So peds applicants who are really interested to going into peds, I think they'll figure it out. Try to have a very pediatric specific CV, and if you are really passionate about it, it will certainly resonate in your CV. And for everyone, I'd like to say is to start your application early.
Mm-hmm.
Because time is one thing which we will not have in hand no matter how much early we start. So as I said, I started my PS somewhere around April. And when I had my final draft, there was not even a single sentence out of my first draft which I had in my final draft. So after having around 15 to 20 different revisions, I think everything changes. I know some of my friends who did their CV and PS in just 2 days. It's doable, I'm not questioning that, but if you give yourself and your application enough time, I think it will transform into something which you cannot expect. It will transform into a very good CV and PS. So start your application early. It takes a lot of planning, especially with COVID going on. If you are able to get some on-site US clinical experience, you have to manage all your flights, you have to manage your stay. So start working on your application early. And finally, have confidence in yourself. There was a lot of time when I had self-doubt, I had the fear of not matching. Most of the time I was overthinking, okay, if I don't match, what's going to happen? But in the hindsight that I've matched in my first cycle, I think I could have saved all those time of overthinking and put into something which was useful. So I think it's easier said than done, but I think we need to have that confidence in us. All
Yeah.
the best.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Morgan. This is very, very helpful, very motivating to others who may be interested. So thank you for your time and good
Thank you,
luck
Dr.
for
Kira.
ahead.
Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you all. Thank you.